further research into the effect coronavirus can have on the body has found it can leave patients paralysed, with experts now claiming that recovery could take as long as a year. While close to 80% of the population may be asymptomatic to the virus, meaning they won't show any symptoms, those who are impacted enough to require a ventilator can experience brain problems and organ failure. And given the chance we may never find a vaccine to this virus, given our lack of vaccine to other similar coronaviruses like SARS and the common cold, living with coronavirus might be more of an ongoing reality than perhaps earlier thought. Australian National University's infectious diseases physician, Professor Peta Collignon, joins me now from Canberra. Professor, I've got to start just on the top there, before we get into the detail about the effect on the body. Please just amplify the comments I made there about the likelihood, let's, fingers crossed, hope we get a vaccine, but other similar coronaviruses don't have a vaccine. We've got to contemplate the fact we may not have a vaccine anytime soon.
Well, that's true, and I don't think we'll have it anytime soon because it'll be at least 18 months to 2 years, I think, before we have enough of a vaccine to not only vaccinate all of Australia, but what's even more important is the rest of the world. And those studies take a while, and we need to learn from previous trials with or studies into coronavirus. In animals, for instance, the coronavirus vaccines not only didn't work, but actually enhanced infection. And that was at least the same with one of the SARS vaccines in chimpanzees or monkeys when they tried it. So it's not a given we'll have a vaccine. And even common infections that are a bit different, like RSV and another one called dengue, vaccines there haven't been very efficacious. And if you think about HIV, hepatitis C, for instance, we've tried for a long period of time to come up with a vaccine, but unfortunately haven't been able to do it. So I do think we'll probably get a vaccine that is safe and effective, but it's by no means a given that it will definitely happen.
So explain to me then, what happens now that we start to let people back out of their homes and into the community? Is it a case that without a vaccine, older Australians, the more vulnerable of us, really have a continuation of this home isolation for the foreseeable future?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, Australia has been very successful at not only flattening the curve, but turning it. And there is very little community transmission in all the states of Australia. Now, but there's not none. And the other problem is that this virus is unlikely to have been eliminated. It's probably there in low numbers, which means it can pop up at any time again if we give it a chance. And by giving it a chance is what if we don't keep on doing what we know stops this virus being transmitted. This virus is transmitted by droplets. And the reason droplets is important because it means it drops. And that's why the 1.5, 2 metre rule is so important. It may actually be easier to spread in winter than summer, so we'll have to be really careful in July and August. But equally, we can't all become hermits for the next 2 years or longer. So we have to come up with a balance. Let's make the risk as low as we can, but also get on with the important things in life, including not only livelihood, but our social interactions and everything else.
But Professor,
we have to limit crowds.
That all works, I suppose, in a situation where we are now, where we have transmission under control, where we have the contact tracing up and going, and of course, most importantly, we have our global or our national borders closed. If we were to reopen our borders, that changes the game dramatically. If we weren't to have fair income quarantining, this hospital-based enforced 2-week quarantining, again, that changes the game enormously.
Well, I think our external borders are a real issue. I mean, this virus is everywhere around the world. So we're not going to have external people coming in without being quarantined for supervised quarantine for 2 weeks for quite a while. It'll have to open up a bit because there's families and there's important business and other things, but it's going to be very much limited to what it was a year ago. But we can control this virus. The reason that the US and Europe are in so much trouble is they had unrecognised spread for probably a couple of months and didn't realise it. We're not in that situation. We're unlikely to get into that situation because we do have lots of testing. We will actually have undoubtedly some outbreaks, and they may well be worse in winter than in summer. But I think it's very unlikely we'll ever be in the situation of New York or London, and we'll be able to control it. We're much more like Korea. Now, Korea's had a problem because they opened up bars and restaurants and pubs again, and clubs and nightclubs. And they've had just one person who probably transmitted to 50 other people. So we're going to be very careful with what we do with our crowds, particularly crowded indoor places where you're probably close together because of the noise, so you shout a bit more, that sends droplets a bit further. So that's going to be a while, I think, before we have nightclubs and bars reopening. But there's lots of other things we can do that seem to be much safer, that make a lot of difference to the economy and livelihoods and people's sanity, that we can probably start slowly opening up. And there's stage 1, 2, and 3 that the federal government is talking about and all the states and territories are on side. That's a good way of starting with some sort of plan that lets us get back to some sort of reasonable normality, but not where we were last year or last winter. We're not going to have tens of thousands of people at sporting matches for quite a while.
No, and I think the outdoors will be relatively more open than not, but the indoor mass events, I think they're gone for some time. Professor Collignon, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.